Hey everyone, welcome Beyond. We're in part of our series, Roadmaps to Resilience. We want to talk about resilience today. Before we jump into that, be sure to hit like and subscribe on the channel so the algorithm can find the channel for others. And today, of course, we're joined by Berke Brown.
What's up, Ben? Good to be here, man.
Hey Berke, great to have you as always. And so Winston Churchill once said, "Wars are not won by evacuations." Right? If you're going to go through hell, keep going. And of course, that famous quote where he said, "Never, never, never give up." And that, I think, was a lot in part what galvanized Britain, certainly during World War II, when things looked very bleak with the bombing of their cities by the Germans. He really rallied a nation around the concept of resilience. So, we're in a crazy time, right? We got pandemic, we got race riots, we got tension, we got unemployment, difficult jobs, personal tragedies, name a few. So I want to talk today about 6 strategies about how we can employ a resilient sort of mindset and approach. So the first strategy I came across was really accept reality. I think it's easy to live in unreality with drugs, alcohol, or any other escapism method. And it's really to stay in denial about your job or situations actually happening to you. But just like a doctor that successfully treats a malady or disease state, they'd all say it's all about catching it early, right? So you want to diagnose early, catch it early, to treat it early. So how important in your estimate is it to recognize your situation and go through the stages of grief, from denial to acceptance faster? In other words, how important is it to really get into reality of your situation and go through those stages if you lost a job quicker?
Right. Avoidance, it's the ostrich sticking its head in its hand thinking that nobody can see it, right? If I close my eyes, then that means that nobody can see me. And when we are avoiding the experience, we're avoiding the emotions, when we are avoiding what is happening, it does one thing. It anesthetizes the problem. But if I numb a wound when I'm bleeding out, I'm still going to die from that wound. Right? Just because I don't feel it doesn't mean that I'm healed. It doesn't mean that I'm okay. And so one of the most important things, like you said, is you have to go through it. You have to experience the process of grief, because only until you experience the entire process can you get out of it. What happens is just because you numb it and don't feel it doesn't mean that it's not there. And so the first thing that we always say, if anybody wants to build the ability to become resilient, they have to be okay with not feeling well. They have to be okay with hurting. They have to be okay with fear. They have to be okay with concern. I start my conversations. I just had a conversation with some partners for some leadership work that we're going to be doing. And I'm saying, how's everybody feeling right now? Say it in 4 or 5 emotional words. What are you feeling? Is it fear? Is it concern? Is it anger? Is it anxiety? What are the feelings? Because when we acknowledge what's really happening, then we can build from a real ground. But if we act like it's not there, if we act like we're not feeling what we're feeling, then we're actually allowing that problem to resurface again when another circumstance hits. And that means we become slaves to our circumstances as opposed to masters of our own lives.
What is it about humans when they go through a situation, a divorce or loss of a job, or it's sort of creeping up to that, right? Where, let's say in a relationship and you're heading towards a divorce, you know all the warning signs are there, you know all the red flags are there, and yet you almost go blithely along as if there's not really an issue, as if it's not really what it is. A partner could be saying, "Hey, I'm really not happy about these things." And in one's mind, they can just play it off like, well, they'll get over it. It's not a big deal, as opposed to really taking hold and grabbing onto that concept or that thought that's being shared about where a person's at. It just seems to me, I've seen so many people go through that process and they're fundamentally in denial. And then when they get that service, right, or they get that paper, on divorce papers, right? Maybe they're served at work, or maybe they're served somewhere else, and they're shocked and stunned. What is it about us where it's more comfortable to stay in a denial state versus a state of reality?
You said the word, you hit the nail right on the head. It's comfort. At the end of the day, our human nature, we naturally are looking for the path of least resistance. If I'm exercising, I lift up something that's heavy, my muscle fibers tear, they break down, and they rebuild, so the next time it's not as heavy. Everything in nature, if you look at a river, how it cuts through, it finds the path of least resistance to get back to the ocean. In the same way, we by nature are looking for the easiest ways for things to happen. Now, in some specific categories, that works to build innovation, to create new things. It allows us to be able to communicate the way that we're communicating now. We're in a pandemic, and 100 years ago, this wouldn't have been able to happen, right? But there are areas where it actually is harmful to us. And what happens is the status quo is comfort. It's a pattern that's been played over and over and over again, where it's created this routinization of how we live our lives. And since it's not broke, we don't need to fix it. But if something's falling, it will break ultimately. But in our minds, we're looking at it and saying that it's not broken, so we don't need to fix it. And so a lot of times, one of the most important things to understand, and this goes back to what we said before about resilience, is that if you're not willing to be uncomfortable, then you cannot grow. Nature itself teaches us that. We said it before, the diamond, pressure, gold, fire. For a tree to gain its strength, it has to go through a storm. For our muscles to get bigger, they have to break down. We have to put ourselves in positions that make us sore and uncomfortable. And we have to be willing to know that when we feel that discomfort, it means that we're growing. So if you're in a relationship and you're noticing that your spouse is saying things, even if it's passive aggressive, and it's more often than not, if you notice the trend, you then say, okay, we need to have a state of the union conversation, and we need to have that difficult conversation, because I know that when we get in that conversation, this person is going to say things about my identity that I don't want to deal with. But the truth is, if you want to grow, feedback is a good thing. I need feedback. When you're flying a plane, you need feedback to know what's going on so you know where you're at. If you don't know where you stand, if you're not willing to have that uncomfortable conversation, you cannot evolve. And if you cannot evolve, that relationship cannot evolve.
Boy, that's great points, Berke. And it kind of reminds me of sort of a dichotomy of two concepts, right? Well, actually, it's the same concept. Imagine, we've all heard of this, right? The frog goes into the water that's cold, and slowly but surely you turn up the heat, and before he knows it, he's cooked, right? And that's kind of like in relationships. You're in that relationship for a very long time. We get really comfortable with things, and pretty soon the heat's getting turned up, and maybe we sense it's hot, but we're just not really connecting to the severity of what's really happening, versus a frog that's thrown into a boiling pot of water. He's going to jump right out. And it reminds me of, sometimes we need that extreme experience or event to happen. I remember one time I went parachuting in Utah. And the guy, we went through about a half a day of instruction. He says, remember, haste makes pace, meaning when you're up there, if you panic and you're not going through the process of what we told you to do, if your main chute doesn't pop and you're trying to open your secondary, slow down, process, think about it. But sometimes you need those extreme events to really get your senses awoke, right? Or woke,
Yep.
maybe we should say.
Right.
And then all of a sudden change it happens, right? Change happens instantly. There's no question about it. So to me, it's like that frog in the pan, where we have to accept reality. And the sooner we accept that reality, the better it is for all that's involved in that process.
Absolutely. There's two ways to learn, and you said it perfectly: trauma or repetition. In the first 5 to 7 years of our lives, we're developing, right? So we're just absorbing, taking in information. And so whatever beliefs that our parents have, whatever beliefs the society around us has, those become who we are, and it shows us what normal is. But to change outside of that requires sometimes a hit to the gut, trauma. When you have that trauma, your mind says, this pain is greater than the pain of change. I must shift. I must change. That's what trauma does. The other one, for those of us who kind of have forethought, we're like, okay, maybe I want to avoid that trauma. So let me just repeat a new pattern to create a new neural network of how I see the world. And if I do that, it avoids the experience of hitting as many traumas. But some people are hard-headed. I've had clients on both sides who are they prepare so much that they don't do, or they do so much that they get incapacitated. So it's kind of finding that balance between allowing trauma, when things hit, to be able to walk through that fire, to engage and feel your emotions and experience what you're experiencing, but at the same time, learn from the lessons of other people as much as you can, so that you can say, wow, I saw that trauma. Let's see if I can change my internal pattern so that I can avoid that myself. It's being able to look at it from both perspectives and using both opportunities as a chance to evolve.
Yeah, that's a good point. Have you ever met those people that are on the 60th lesson of the same lesson, and you speak into their life,
right?
And you say, hey, here's some really sage advice. Here's some things to think about. And they listen to you. And then they go do the same thing again. They come right back to you saying, hey, Berke, I don't understand it. And they're describing the exact same thing.
Yep.
And they're on the 60th conversation of that same thing. It's curious that we sometimes get stuck, right? We get stuck in those patterns and habits, and even they're doing just tons of damage on many levels. It's just amazing how people can't pull out of it. So is it more about being aware of it, or just staying comfortable in that way?
Yeah. You know, the word or phrase that I use is yeah, but. Yeah, but. They're called yabbits. Do you have the yabbits? It's where somebody speaks a truth to you, right? And you're like, yeah, but. Right? The but, whatever follows the but is your higher truth. And what it is I can almost say, instead of your higher truth, let's call that the thing that you anchor yourself to. Whatever follows the but is what you are stuck with. So if I say, hey, you can do this, this, and this will put you in a better space, they say, yeah, but you don't understand my situation, right? Yeah, but this is what happened. And so whatever follows the but is where you get stuck. So when I'm working with my clients, because they do this all the time, because they're terrified, as soon as they have a revelation, they think, yeah, I can do that, but this always ends up happening. I say, all you have to do is switch what happens before yeah with the but. So if I say, you know, hey, in order for me to let's say, for example, we'll just keep a simple, very physical one. I'm trying to lose weight. Yeah, I need to go to the exercise, but my kids are always doing A, B, and C. If we switch, my kids are always doing A, B, and C, but I need to go still to the gym and exercise. Then we'll find a way, because whatever we do after the but is the way we'll find. So if I say that it's my kids that are the problem, then I've linked myself to the kids, and that is the story and the narrative that stops me from exercising. But if I say the kids are an issue, but the importance of going to the gym is more important, then I will find a way, because the truth is there's always a way. And so it's very important for people to just remember that the reason that we find ourselves in these cycles all the time is because we say, yeah, but. It's the last thought that we stick ourselves to. And if we can change that last thought to being the thought before, and change the problem to becoming the predecessor, then we have the solution as the subject, the thing that finals. That's the direct object. That's what we're moving to. Yes, this is a problem, but here is solution. As opposed to, yeah, that's a good solution, but here is problem. That shift in mindset changes the game 100%.
Absolutely. So, when we think about resilience, another key aspect or key recipe for resilience, or having a resilient approach to everything, is really managing your emotions, right? It's really easy to panic when you lose your job, or you lose a significant other, or relationship, or fill in the blank. It's
Right.
really easy to panic. I remember when I was learning to scuba dive out of Newport, I was in ninth grade, and my diving buddy and I went down to about 30 feet, 35 feet with the whole group, and we're swimming. And it was by Divers Cove in Laguna. And I remember we're swimming together, and he's about just off to my right side. I could see his arm strokes, and he came and ripped the regulator right out of my mouth. Remember,
Mm.
I'm down 30, 35 feet. It's my first ocean dive after coming out of the pool. That was my grand experience, right? It was my first, except we
Right,
flew
right,
in a circle at one point and saw aquatic life go shooting through. But our first real dive, he pulled it out, right?
right.
I had a choice to make. I could have said, holy cow, I'm going to go ascend really quickly, right? I had a tank on.
Yeah,
Or I can go back and revert back to the training they gave me,
right.
where I can recollect my regulator and move on. Now, I did that. But I think a lot of times people in that situation could panic. So how does rash decision making compound the problems we are experiencing when we're going through a trauma?
Yeah, it's natural for humans to react. That's why if you look at the military, they're trained to respond in a very specific way. They're trained not to even doubt their choices, because it's just about decision. When they say, when you make a decision, you murder the alternative. It's just go with because lives cost seconds, right? Seconds cost lives. That's just the way it works. But what's important is to understand first, before you can get to that knee-jerk reaction of doing the right thing, you have to create space. You have to create space between the trigger and the action. Because if there is no space, it's a reaction. If there is space, it's a response. And so what we have to do is, before we put ourselves in those situations where we experience those triggers and naturally react, we have to look back at the other triggers and say, what happened? What is it that caused me to react the way that I did? What is it that taught me that moved me in a position to where I felt fight or flight and either did the flying or did the fighting? How do I see what my recipe is to my trigger? Because then what happens is you start to be able to pull together an idea of what the steps are that cause you to get to that place. And so what those steps become, as you become aware of how they work in your life, they become red flags. Because we don't know what causes us to trigger. We don't know what the processes are for me to react a certain way. Only until we do analysis, only until we retroactively look back, do we begin to say, whoa, this person said this person said that. Or if we look at the marriage, we say, okay, they made this passive aggressive statement, but then at the same time, they stopped doing this. They started showing up a little bit late to this. You start to become aware of all these things that happen, and then those become red flags for your next opportunity. right? It's about understanding what your process is to reaction so that you can turn those steps into red flags that allow you the freedom of mind to say, you know what, I want to respond. And when you get to that place, that's when you have power. When you were underwater, your coach, your teacher taught you how to respond in those situations, and you practice it over and over and over again. So then in this situation, you're like, okay, I'm triggered. What are my options? What do I need to do? What is the teaching? Then you can
Yeah.
engage. That's where you have that massive power because you're no longer a slave to reaction.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me that we think about our lives, we think about being an astronaut or an engineer or a pilot or maybe a neurosurgeon, and all those guys get training, and everybody in the populace expects those people to perform at a very high level
Mm-hmm.
and the outcomes to be the best it can be based on their training. And it seems to me that if we looked at our life more in terms of training and think of ourselves as everyday astronauts, right, where
Mm.
every day is a practicum to learn and grow our skill set, our tool set about how we respond and react to things. And I was reading where one of the key strategies of astronauts or pilots or Navy SEALs to fight the panic feeling is through a feeling of control, which is through training, which you talked
Yeah.
about. And I remember when I was in the Air Force, when we about 14 hours, I was soloing a T-37 jet. 14 hours from landing at the base to when I was actually flying the plane by myself.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the key things they said, and by the way, in that training, it's intensive, just training for every scenario you could imagine under the sun. For example, on a hot day in Texas, if you take off and you lose one engine, you have a decision to make. Do you have enough engine to keep flying? Do you have enough runway to land? If you lose both engines, do you punch out? Well, on a T-37, you have a minimum altitude at which you can punch out safely. So then you have to make the decision to stay with the aircraft because that would be the best alternative. And so
Right.
they gave us a 3 sort of step process, which I've used in so many things, which is
Love this.
when you're flying the airplane, the first thing you do is maintain aircraft control. Second thing you do is analyze the situation. And the third thing you do is land as soon as conditions permit. But it's always about maintaining control,
Mm.
analyzing what's going on, and making sure you're landing that metaphorical airplane in our lives. And I think the more we think about our lives every day as a training practicum, and unfortunately we don't get medals, bars, awards that signify
Right.
now you're a general because you went through some level of challenge or pain or whatever. But boy, is it an opportunity to really look at some tools and recipes to apply to our lives on an ongoing basis so that when we get into that divorce situation or lose a job, we have the resilience to make it through.
I love that. And, just being able to create that analogy just helps people in such a huge way. Okay, what are the 3 things I need to ask myself? And we can create that in our own lives. What are the 3 things I need to ask? First thing, okay, what am I feeling? Right? If I'm emotionally triggered, if I can say, what am I feeling? That puts me in that place where I'm like, okay, I'm doing the analysis. I'm seeing where I'm at. When you say, what am I feeling? You no longer are the emotion either. You're neither like, I am angry. It's like, oh, I feel anger. So then you get your first level of objectivity, right? And then you're saying, okay, what can I do to reduce this? Then you think about it. And then you think, okay, where's the other person coming from? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And then you see, okay, that's where they're coming from. So what happens now is you've removed yourself so much to where you're like, this entity, Berke, feels this emotion. This person is saying this, and they're coming from possibly this place, which puts me in a state of curiosity. And then from then I'm like, okay, what is the solution? How do we land this plane? You have that 3-prong approach, all of a sudden you aren't a slave. All of a sudden you actually have control over the entire situation, including the other person who doesn't have control, right? So we're putting ourselves in that place where we first gain control of the situation ourselves and then see how do we get to solution. This is a powerful, powerful skill set to have, and it takes repetition.
Yeah, it takes repetition, training, and being really thoughtful about what you're going through, right? And so
Right.
another key sort of recipe for resilience and having a resilient mind, and this is going to be a sort of a curveball to many, is learn to quit quickly. Learn
Mm.
when to quit, right? How many times when in a situation we're way over our heads, we're way over our ski tips, maybe we want to take on this bold, incredible degree, maybe biology, pre-med to get into becoming a doctor. And I know a lot of people that went through college pre-med, they got out. They got into biology or chemistry and they realized they didn't have the tools and skill sets. And one could take it as the end of the world. The other could take it as the beginning of a new world. And so the idea of when we get in over our heads, we got to be able to assess the situation and our ability to affect that situation, what our skill sets are, and be honest with ourselves. Can we really complete this? Can we really go through this? Or do we decide to quit, regroup, and come back with some additional tools. So the question for you is, in a society of high achievers who set off for medicine or engineering, or maybe even to become an astronaut, how important in your estimate is it to assess your own abilities and where we are at mentally, maybe even spiritually, and consider quitting, or looking at the current course and get a chance to do things again when we're more prepared? I guess, how important is it to really assess where we're at and if we should continue going or do something different?
Yeah, this is great. And this is so important because it's so contradictory. We look in our Western society, we talk about Henry Ford and how many failures he had. We talk about Edison and 10,000 before he found the one that worked. That mindset is there, but at the same time, we have been taught to be terrified of failure. Don't quit, right? So there's actually this conflict between he failed 1,000 times and this other thing that's saying never fail, like continue, be perfect, don't course correct. The truth is that if I'm trying to get to a destination and I find out that the freeway is closed, if I take the detour, am I quitting? No, I'm not quitting. I'm taking a different path. The thing is, but most people, what they believe is that the road is the goal. The road to a thing is the goal. It's not true. If my goal is to have a certain job doing a very specific thing, that's a road. But if I want success and financial freedom for my family, that's the goal. And so really it ties back to what I talk about when I'm working with organizations and I'm working with clients. I say your vision doesn't change, but your mission can change. The way you show up in your work, that can change. If I know my vision, I may have to take a detour, but I can't marry myself to the highway. I can't marry myself to the road. I have to understand that the vision is so strong that I'm willing to make adjustments. You have to fail fast. And when you find out that this entity, this area, this business that I'm trying to run and move, I'm not getting traction. There isn't proof of market. Yeah, I really believe in it, but is this belief bigger than your grand vision of what you're trying to achieve? So it's about sometimes being willing to say, I'm going to set this aside for a second and I'm going to engage where I can. I was a musician back in the day. Before all of this, I was a musician. Music was the direction that I was going to go. I got a callus on my vocal cords and I wasn't able to sing. I tried so hard to find a way, maybe produce music, maybe I can create in a different way. But I realized that it had reached a point where I'm actually taking away from my life energy, my life power, fighting this wall.
So
what
true.
I had to say, I'm going to set you up on the bookshelf for a second. And I have to reinvent myself. When I talk about my vision is I envision a world where boundless imagination and creativity is applied to life itself, right? We want to apply where each individual is empowered to master and evolve. Mastering and evolving is what I realized I had to do. I had mastered music, but I had hit a wall. So I had to evolve beyond it. So then from there, I was able to create my research on behavior change. Then from there, I was to take a totally circuitous pathway to become the person that I am. I didn't fail. It was just a detour. And this detour has empowered me to create music in way different ways than just phonically. I'm creating music between clients in their mind. I'm creating music in the way that people see the world. I'm creating harmony where there was no harmony. When I'm working on conflict resolution, I'm creating from discord, from cacophony, an orchestration. So I'm creating music still. And I know that I'm going to be making music in the future. And I'm still playing guitar now. I have it in my house. So what happens is you realize that the vision is the most important thing. What you're trying to create the world to be is the most important thing. And then you show up in whatever mission. I say, like, if you put a light through a prism, all of a sudden a rainbow shoots out. You are every one of those colors. And if for a second the red light's out, then go yellow, go green, go in all those different areas and trust that you're still going to be able to express that light that is your spirit, your energy, your soul.
That's powerful. One of the things we learned in pilot training is a concept called flexibility. Flexibility is the key to air power. So when you go up in a flight and it's contact flying a severe clear day, in Oklahoma where we were training, you could literally have inclement weather hit within 30 minutes or 10 minutes. It didn't matter. Also, you have storm clouds and thunderstorms, and it would change the mission profile instantaneously. And so the idea of having flexibility, and I like the word quit because sometimes that's the best thing to do based on your skill sets, based on your gift. It's about being realistic. It's about, as we talked about in the first sort of principle, right? We talked about accept reality. Yeah. Maybe you're not the world's best pilot. Maybe you can't process as fast. It doesn't mean you don't have another bazillion things you can offer. And I came across this thing from Rorsch, and he found that people that quit their unattainable goals saw physical and psychological benefits. Quote, they have, for example, less depressive symptoms, less negative effect over time. He says they also have lower cortisol levels and they have lower levels of systemic inflammation, which is a marker of immune functioning. And they develop fewer physical health problems over time. So it seems to me that if we lock ourselves in an unrealistic goal because we're trying to please parents or a significant other or play to the ego and what society expects of us, boy, it takes people through just this grinder in life. And they come out at some point and said, man, that ladder has been against the wrong wall for years.
Resilient. And it's so great that you talk about this, because even scientifically tying to that, what they notice is that the more identities you have, the more resilient you are. So if I saw myself as only a musician, which I did at the time, when I lost music, I died. That's what I thought. I was gone. But what I realized is I'm like, wait, I'm also a teacher and educator, a researcher. I'm also a son. And you start to realize that as you have more identities, you're not as disposed or predisposed to be destroyed if something closes, if you quit something. But if you put all of your eggs, all of your identity, all of who you are in a single thing, when that falls, you fall. And so it's so important to really understand that I am more than just this business. I am more than just this relationship. I'm more than all of these things, because the more that there's intersectionality, the more freedom you have to fall back on these other perspectives of identity. If your self-concept is too wrapped up, and it never should be too wrapped up in a thing, it can be wrapped up in an idea and a vision, but not in a thing, because things are always able to fall, shift, change, be destroyed. We can't put them in things. We only put them in ideas. That's why religion is such a powerful thing, because you're like, no matter what, I know that God won't betray me. This allows you, this is how you're able to endure things that people wouldn't normally do. Even in the 12-step program, they found out in research that the people who have a connection to a higher power, they're more likely to be successful, because when they come down to the base of their addiction, they can still look up to something that's not addicted, right? When you're part of a cause that's bigger than you, or a vision that's bigger than you, then all of a sudden you can tie to something that's bigger than your own strength, whether it be real or made up in your mind. You tie to something bigger to you, and that drives you to continue to push forward towards your vision, as opposed to being married to a very specific outcome.
Boy, you know, what you say reminds me of a lot of people that struggle with, they've invested everything, every waking hour into that thing, and maybe they became really successful. I think about Michael Jordan, or maybe eventually Tiger Woods. Your whole persona was built in being the most dominant basketball player in your era. In my mind, the greatest of all time, but that's for debate, right? But in his time, he applied a craft, and he was the best in the world, the known world, right? And so talk about the potential for identity crisis. We put all our chips, if you will, in that thing, because we're going to get old. We're going to lose the physicality.
Right.
We're going to lose the quick, twitch reaction times. That's going to happen. We're going to lose the acuity of our minds at some level, right? So, boy, what you say is so fundamental, that if we put everything in a basket, that I've got money, or I'm a CEO, or I've got power, prize, position, none of that really matters ultimately, right? And so I think it's a really important concept you bring up, because I think it's a huge struggle for a lot of people, because to get worth in this culture and to get money that signifies your worth, you have to go develop that thing singularly. Right. That's what you got to do. And sometimes that thing gets blown up, and then you have to recreate yourself, like you said, where, hey, I'm going to be a musician, and with that, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And all of a sudden you have that event happen to your vocal cords, and you had to pivot. You had to show flexibility. And luckily your mind is so flexible that you can see dimensionally that this doesn't define who I am. This isn't just who I am. I'm so many other things. And clearly, I'm sure your clientele would agree, you're a lot of different things, not just a musician.
You know, it's what I've realized is that it's creativity. When I look at my values, one of my values is creativity. And I am a creator. And if I can create others in other situations and other businesses, then I can also recreate myself. This is the power. This is what's so amazing about human nature. You can grow, you can change, you can atrophy. We are what we are, and then we can poke and make changes to it. And so for me, I'm like, okay, then I'm a creator, and I will create programs, and I will create realities. I will create new ways of thinking. I will recreate myself and recreate my perspective. And this is where we gain freedom. This is where all the things that we chase, because every human being in the world chases everything. But then you get to like, I love myself, and I love the ability for me to create and recreate. And then all of a sudden, it's no longer the game of, look at my sculpture, look at my sculpture. It's like, thank God I have the skill set to sculpt. Right.
Right. True. Very true. So I think another key to resilience is being delusional, right? And Marshall Goldsmith did a study on successful people and found they all had one thing in common. They were completely delusional, right? And they noticed that these people, although the illusions of control expose people to risk of failure, right? Because these super successful people have such a belief in themselves that they think they have more control than they really do, and they end up failing a lot. But
Mm,
because they're so delusional, they have no they have no fear of risk, if you will. They're
right.
not afraid of the failure. They go on right on to the next one and the next one and the next one. So in your experience, I guess in the case of what you've studied at Berkeley, what do your studies suggest is the importance of a delusional view
Right.
and the ability to achieve massive results?
Yes, there's two sides to this. There's two categories of delusion. We look at the delusion of Steve Jobs, right? Elon Musk. These are all delusional. What it is, that's the reality distortion field. That delusion is powerful because what happens is you believe in a thing so much that it demands an action out of you that is so intense and that is so non-risk averse. It's just I have to create it. It's when your kind of whole life is put on it. They say if you have nothing to die for, you have nothing worth living for. But it's you're so clear and so certain that this must happen that you bring people on to believe this idea and push people on to think that this is what can happen. This is powerful. This delusion, this type of thinking is important because that's what pushes the world forward. And what it is only delusion because you're thinking with a mindset that the world is not achieved yet. That's a delusion that's based on the future. You are seeing the future. You stepped above the mountain and you've seen the view. And when you're explaining it to people, they're like, what the heck are you talking about? Or let's say that you're in a cave. If I'm in a cave and I see a little light and I walk up and then I see the meadow and I explain the meadow to people who only know darkness, I'm delusional. But what I see is something that is my vision and I want to walk. I will grope through the darkness to be able to find it again. This is where you gain a superpower. Now, the part where it's dangerous is because all of a sudden we live in a society where Instagram and everything has told us about all the people can be successful and everybody can be a mogul and everybody wants to go after this thing. And so what happens is people have delusions of grandeur, but that grandeur is not based in, and here's the difference, their core values.
Mm-hmm.
Elon Musk wants to get to Mars. Steve Jobs wants to change the way that we see technology and the way that we move it and even the way that we look at it. He had a vision of what he wanted to create, and it came from his values of creativity, how he cared about design. Elon Musk, his vision was tied to who he was as a person. The dangerous delusion is where it's tied to your imagination of what you think your value should be. Success, money, fame. All of a sudden, then you see these people that are doing it on Instagram or faking it, then they have this delusion of chasing something that is not tied to their soul value. And if it's not tied to their soul value, you get something like Enron. You get something where you try to convince people that, hey, we're going to do it, we're going to do it. And they found out that people that are too optimistic in businesses, if they're too optimistic, sometimes they do deceitful things to change the numbers.
Right.
Right? So it becomes dangerous because they're not tied to their human values. They're tied to the societal values. And when you're tied to a value that is not connected to your human internal drivers, that's where deception, that's where deceit, that's where these dangerous practices come. But when you're tied to values and you're delusional about your own values that are tied to your own internal drivers, that's where you change the world.
Yeah, if it's not tied to your own internal values, it's not sustainable. Enron, and there's a lot of companies you can point to where fundamentally, if you're going after the wrong things of what creates value in a business, none of it's sustainable. If you're going after the right things, in other words, I don't think Elon Musk wakes up and says, my goal is to be a billionaire. How do I go do that? He wakes up saying, how can I fundamentally change the world and make it such an exceptionally exciting place to live that when you wake up in the morning, you're springing out of bed? How can I create such a grand vision? And of course, when you do that, everything follows: money, wealth, comfort, whatever. But I don't think intrinsically, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all those guys were focused on, I want to be a billionaire. I think they were focused on something they were hyper passionate about. And they had a vision. All these guys had a vision. You think about Microsoft, and he goes to IBM and does a deal that transforms the company forever, where he has a software and he's going to make it available to all the hardware, right? And he saw the vision of where this was going way before IBM saw it, because IBM could have done a different deal.
Right.
Or if you look at Steve Jobs, where he saw that vision and what Apple became, and every successful product launch, right? Remember the iPod, I think it was, and then it had iterations of that, and then the iPhone, and then the iPad, and just hit after hit after hit. I would say that's a visionary. And I don't think he was setting out with, how do I, sort of stage myself in front of people to be the man, to be respected, admired for the money I have. It was
Sure.
really for his greatest gift, which is creativity. If you believe in God, which I do, and He's the creator of the universe, anybody that's creative, that God just bestowed you with His greatest gift, creativity.
Right. It's so interesting too, because money becomes resources to people who are
Right.
passionate. If money is a goal, that's, again, we're not looking at the vision, we're looking at this road. I want money, comfort, all these different things. If those are my endpoints, then I'm not thinking of the right, I'm not thinking in a mogul mindset. It's the resource of money. So for me, when I'm looking at, I want money, it's, I want to create something that's worthy of money. I'm transferring my life energy, mind energy, spirit energy for monetary energy. I get that monetary energy back, and it's not like, yeah, I can go lavish. What it is how do I reinvest this into the resources to create the vision that I want? Right? It's this type of perspective, just like you're saying, to be able to tie tools to get to the vision, as opposed to desiring the tools or the luxury or the lifestyle. Now, you can enjoy those by all means, but the thing that drives you, in order for you to be able to break through all the noise of this society, is to find out what drives you, set that as the point of vision, and then run. And then you'll find out, oh, I need money. Tesla, the way Tesla started, it was genius. You make this luxury car and then slowly make it more economical. At the same time, you create all these points to charge your vehicles that other cars can, and then you give your patented information to these other companies so they can create those cars, so they can use those charged vehicles, because he's trying to push forward. If he was smart for money in the immediate moment, he would have kept his patents tight, but he had a further vision of what he wanted to do. That's how he's able to pull into SpaceX, which is a business to lose money. And then all of a sudden, and he's just rolling everything into why? To get to Mars.
Right.
That's powerful.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And he's got such a vision, and how it builds on itself with Starlink. And I don't know how many now. I think there's over 400
Yeah.
Starlinks, circling our not solar system, but our atmosphere.
Yeah. I think you put up 58 of them just like this weekend or something.
Yeah, I mean, and of course that's going to be the revenue drivers for to get to Mars. What's beautiful about it is, obviously, when he did this, he wanted to get people's imaginations going, right, and he wanted to get funding from the government. But I think what he realized pretty quickly was, as the ebbs and flows of elections happen, and you get Democrats or Republican, so does the budget for NASA. It ebbs and flows, and so it really disrupts any kind of mission critical initiatives you have to get to a certain place, such as Mars. And the idea of making it a private private endeavor, if you will, and then the fact that you have Starlink to provide the revenue, because that could just be, I've read estimates of $32 billion a year in revenue. That'll absolutely fund your efforts to get to Mars. So he's got kind of a sustainable business model, assuming it works out. I remember he was talking about Starlink. He kind of laughed. He goes, a lot of my friends like, why are you doing that? He goes, I'm not sure, because everybody else that's tried it has failed completely, and yet he's doing that. But I think something tells me they meet with success. And hats off to that vision.
Right. Absolutely.
So another key recipe for resilience I think about is preparation. We talked about this, and I know when I was learning how to fly, one of the things we do is we'd visualize when we weren't flying the different flight profiles we get into, and when we had certain critical situations of flight or major failure mode in the plane, what do you do? So you kind of go through mentally the process you'd go through if you get in that situation. I know when you learn how to fly in the military, they just got a lot of checklists. So you, on your knee is a board, and all the checklists from taxiing to takeoff to ascent to level up to descent to any aspect of the flight. And so the idea of preparation, whether it be in the military, if you look at neurosurgeons, attendings, and residents, they go through, beyond just a regular school and medical school, another 6 years of residency in neurosurgery to become a neurosurgeon, right? And they got to take boards, and it's constant training and ever evolution. So the idea that preparation can really settle the mind and really give you confidence in any adversity, because you know how to handle it. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Naked and Afraid. You get some guys in there and gals that are totally unprepared or unequipped to handle the wilderness and the extremes that they're in. And then you see these sort of military survivalists come in, and it's like it's a vacation. I mean, the difference couldn't be more stark. I remember watching this guy, and he was fired up, man. I got to tell you, it's like he made like a Marriott out of the situation. It
Right,
was not a
right, right.
problem getting food. It was not a problem getting water. And it wasn't a problem, doing what they needed to do. And just that preparation and training was incredible. So question for you is, what are some of the things we can do to prepare for future pandemics or
Right,
career setbacks or personal setbacks
right.
as we move forward?
You know, the name of my business is the Internal Gym. It's the exercising of the mind. This is the type of preparation. It's watching these type of videos. It's putting yourself in a position to where you are thinking about all the potential realities that are available and how you can adjust and maneuver to be able to pivot yourself in a place to find opportunity in these spaces. But it also requires you being resilient, because when the pandemic hits, if you have the tools to know how to go through your emotions and experience and come out stronger before anybody else, then you're on the cutting edge of creating incredible things. And I think that being able to allow yourself to do two things. One is visualize. And visualization is, if you're in a situation where things are dire and you don't know what's going on, you have to start to imagine hope. You start to imagine yourself being successful. Imagine yourself waking up early. Imagine yourself exercising and fit. Imagine yourself shaking hands, getting deals. Imagine yourself getting a no and not being afraid. The more that you can visualize, they did research where they had people who would shoot a basketball every day for practice, people that wouldn't for a week, and then people that imagined it for a week. And then they all came. Obviously, the people that practiced for a week got the best scores. But surprisingly, the people that only imagined it did better than the people that didn't do anything. Just by imagining it, you get better shots. How does your brain even know that? You don't even know what it feels like to make the perfect shot. But just by imagining it, the body adjusts to that thing. And so visualizing yourself in a place of resilience, a place of success, a place of saying yes, of getting the yes, of hearing the no and not worrying at all, saying, okay, 9 more to go. Let's do it. When you allow yourself to see that, it's as though you did it. It's as though you did it. And when you do that repetitively, pretty soon when the opportunity hits, it'll just be deja vu. The problem is when things hit, it's not deja vu. Therefore, fight or flight must happen. But if you can get to a space of deja vu where you imagine it over and over again, just like I said before, retroactively remembering what happened over before for you to trigger, it's the same thing. It's you practicing acting out a different way. One is retroactive, one is proactive. The visualization of you seeing yourself successful is what makes you successful. That is one of the most important things, to be able to visualize. The other thing that ties back to that ability to be resilient, if I'm trying to allow myself to be okay in these type of situations, I have to say, what are my check-throughs? What are the processes that I need to go through in order to get myself to feel what I feel and then make action? Because at the end of the day, once you're done feeling, then the most important thing happens: action. When you are acting, you cannot be in a depressed or a disempowered state. When you're acting, when you're focusing, when you're in movement, you cannot slide backwards. And so you have this kind of carrot that draws you because you're visualizing this vision. And then also you have your feet doing the work, which allows you to manifest that vision.
Right. It's kind of funny preparation. We learned that a little bit during the coronavirus, where people were getting prepared with lots of toilet paper, right?
Yeah, right.
So there was fear set in.
Right.
And so it galvanized an action and motivation to go do something. And so we know people are very capable of being proactive and
Right.
preparing when the threat calls. So
Absolutely.
the last, not least, certainly, I think recipe for resilience is staying super busy, right? Busy, right? We know that resilient people, they know that staying busy not only gets you closer to your goal, but it's also the best way to stay calm. I mean, if people are not busy, I think it's been said that idleness is the devil's workshop. And then everything that goes on in the mind when you're not busily going after something. And we've talked about this in other segments for sure. So what, in your experience, would you argue are some practical steps people can take to survive and keep their emotions in check when things get tough?
Right. The first thing goes back to what we said in the beginning: feel what you feel and say it's okay. We said that so many times. Feel what you feel and say that's okay. That's the most important thing. And the reason is not because we're trying to be nice, but because there's a critic within us. There's a condemner within us. There's a judge within us that's constantly saying you're supposed to be doing blank. And that thing is what causes people to fail. It's the I should be that is so destructive to us as human beings, more than almost anything else. It's the fact that we're constantly berating ourselves with how we're not worthy, which freezes us. The first thing is to say it's okay. The second thing is action. And the best type of action, when you can't do action for yourself, funny enough, is action for other people. When you're having a difficult time, if you're out there helping other people, two things happen. One is you can't focus on your problems. And two is you can see other people's problems. And it does two things. One is it allows you to feel connected because you're not the only one feeling pain. And sometimes it can make you grateful because you're not experiencing what they're experiencing. So what happens is when you are able to help somebody, it frees you from the self-condemnation. It frees you from your own kind of pity party and allows you to act. So first thing you do, allow yourself to feel what you feel. Second thing is go out and help somebody. Third thing is remember your vision and act. Stay in motion. If I'm riding a bike up a hill, as soon as I stop riding a bike, I don't stop right there on the hill. I roll backwards. That must happen. Gravity is always pulling. And so our job is, even if we're pedaling on the highest gear, even if it's only making small adjustments and small movements, that is everything. Right. Keep acting. If it's only you're able to make your bed, make your bed. If you're able to make your bed and meditate, make your bed and meditate. Reach out, call somebody, see how they're doing. Okay, you have something for your business? Well, send that one email. When I do my morning ritual, I have all my top tasks, but then I say, if I could only do one thing and consider the day a success, what would it be? When I write that down, I make sure as hell that I get that done. Because even if I failed at everything else, I get to celebrate the fact that I did that. I moved myself an inch forward. It's the ability to be in constant motion that frees us from being sucked back. So forgive yourself, accept where you're at, help someone, and make one motion towards betterment.
Perfect. So how important is it to have a perspective of making this a game, being playful in these circumstances? Like, I'm going to go climb a 19,000 foot mountain. How can I turn that into a game where I'm not just totally petrified with fear and uncertainty and doubt of my abilities? I think it seems to me that when you're thinking about resilience, making and turning into a game is helpful mentally to the process.
Right, right. You know, this goes back to what I was talking about, you know, when I said, what if goals were just excuses for adventure? When you say that a goal is just an excuse for adventure, then you just love the adventure. When I say that, then I'm free from saying, oh, I have to make $1 million off this, or I have to travel to this place and the vacation has to go great. I don't care. I just want to get to that place and then experience the adventure. Good, bad. Even if I realize I don't like the place, I know that I don't like the place versus being a slave to not knowing, or a slave to thinking that it has to be a certain way, right? I have a dog going crazy right now in the back. But so what it ultimately means, though, is it means that no matter what's happening, the adventure is what is the most important. I'm on a roller coaster, not to get off a roller coaster. I'm on a roller coaster to be on the roller coaster, which includes the fear and the excitement and the adrenaline. And so when we allow ourselves to experience that, then we're not going to be seeking comfort all the time, which is the opposite of what life is. We don't have control. We don't have comfort. So if we learn to teach ourselves to be okay with uncomfortable, then we have the freedom to enjoy the ride. And I told you this before, my professor, Dr. Keltner, he said, if you remember anything from my work on positive psychology, don't take yourself so serious. Because if you don't take yourself so serious, then you have the freedom to enjoy the beauty of our 80 or 100 years on this planet if we're lucky. And if we can find a way to become resilient, understanding that at the end of the day, 100 years from now, we're all dead. What can I do to find positivity and give positivity? What can I do to be a light as opposed to be a person who hides when discomfort comes? To be someone who's strong, to engage in this great adventure that's called life, or to avoid it at all costs? You make those choices. And when you make the right choice, you know it. Because no matter what happens in life, you're not a slave to the trigger. You can assess, you can remember your vision, and you can act.
Those are great points, Berke. I mean, those are well summed up, well made, and I think there's a lot of opportunities in these times when we're thinking what we're going through. It's we've lived in a country that's just epically wealthy. Now, I understand there's swaths of society that don't have the same advantages and benefits, but I think this is the richest country in the history of the world, and people are living the highest level of lifestyle in the history of the world. And so when you think about when challenges and ripples come through our lives. Right now, this generation, if you go back to World War II, World War I, they were defined by a lot of challenging times: the Great Depression, 2 world wars. They knew what sacrifice was, right? They knew what challenge was. And now we're in a generation that you stub your toe and it's the end of the world, and I need to go see my therapist. And this is to be trite or making fun of these people. It's just a reality. We're just not geared or wired to handle any kind of extreme. But what's funny, going through this pandemic and riots, as a country, it's really forcing people to develop a different kind of muscle and different kind of metal. and develop that muscle of going through challenging times. That it's not going to always be simple. That I live with mom and dad, I get my college paid for, and I get my 100K plus year job, plus my vacations and everything else. I mean, there's going to be massive ripple effects with what we're seeing with these riots in major cities. In fact, I was reading today, talking about suffering. If you look at Minneapolis, when those riots happen and when they say we want to disband the police force, the next day, 18% of their real estate went on the market. 18%. So you got truckers, 80% of the truckers saying we will not deliver stuffs to these cities that don't have police forces and police departments, right? So you see the ripple effect of one little act can have on the most at-risk part of our population, right? And you look at Walmart or Target and you say, hey, would you like to come back? Well, it all depends on if the city leaders protected what they had in the first place. So the point being is this whole thing we're going through is going to create tremendous hardships. And if you weren't living in a hardship, you may be living in a hardship for a while.
Right.
So the idea of having resilience is really fundamental to how you get through and cope with these times, because I would argue most of these people didn't ask for what's going to happen in Minneapolis. Didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
Maybe New York, or pick another city. Most of these people are law-abiding citizens. They absolutely support the spirit of the protests. But when they started going off the rails, they didn't ask for it. So there's going to be a lot of people impacted. So this idea of resilience and perspective, and knowing that it's not forever, but tough times will happen in your life. It's not going to be a cakewalk. That to me is a healthy perspective.
It is. And what's interesting is that the way that I see it is I take it even a step back to, these are groans of the planet, right? When there's an earthquake, we're not like, what's going on? The earthquake it's an adjusting period. And I think what our society is experiencing is an adjustment, and an adjustment is uncomfortable, right? If we look at the relationship that we have, it's just like the wife who's passive and then she becomes aggressive. And then we're trying to figure out, this is a time where it comes back to that listening, right? And in order for us to listen is we have to be willing to be resilient and understand that our vision is for a better society. Right. And so what we've had earthquakes. We're in a space where things are volatile and people are experiencing, just like you said, the spirit of the protest. There's also these earthquakes that are happening. No one's saying what's right or wrong. What we're saying is this is our opportunity to be okay being uncomfortable. Because if we can build a resilient spirit, then we can say, where can we land this? How do we land this plane? We have clouds, we have lightning, we have all these experiences which are natural to the groans of the earth. And then we say, I have two options. One is I can just shut my windows, or two is I can say, this is where we're at. This is America. And where can we tie into our resilience and then move to a space of how do we land this plane in a way that's powerful? And I think that this is the opportunity that not only our country, but us as individuals have to be able to become better people out of this. The quote that I said a long time ago, it said, I forgot who said it, but it goes, easy times make weak people. Weak people make hard times. Hard times make strong people. We're going through hard times and we've had some weak people, but now we're moving up into this space where all of us are becoming resilient. And then we look at it at an individual level to become stronger so that we can create an even better society, right? An even better family, an even better husband and wife, and an even better self. And that's where resilience has this massive power for us to engage in the dirty, to be able to become better.
Yeah, that's good, because I think a lot of people, when things are easy, it's sort of like it's wide and shallow, right? You can see a body of water.
Yeah.
When you get to the depth of it, it's about an inch deep, and really going deep and developing character and resolve, determination. These are all things that'll serve us well into the future, because our 5 years from now self is going to be tested in a different way.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's health, maybe it's the loss of a loved one, but the test will come. And the idea that, I think the pop culture always says, have it the way you want now, right? Have it your way. The idea in media and how they sort of project and sort of position things in the minds of the audience is really not realistic of real life. I mean, that's what's always interesting about media, because they paint a picture of having the goods, feeling good, and having the good life, or whatever that constitutes. Right. But in reality, everybody knows that that's not my life. I'm going through a lot of different challenges, whether relationally, career, whatever it may be. And it's such a disconnect. It's such a drastic disconnect. And so the idea that life is challenging and tough, not to be fatalistic, is realistic, because it is. And to have a quality response and to grow in wisdom and insight, there's impulse, there's insight, right? There's lust, there's love. The ability to have insight and real true love and real true connection to people, it's an opportunity. The plate's right in front of us. And the question is, do we want to destroy it? Or do we want to take what we're building right now in these times and turn it into something that is much bigger, much stronger, much better for us as humanity?
Absolutely, man. 100%.
So, some thoughts, some musings.
I loved it, man. That's
Berke, always a pleasure
Hey.
getting your wit, wisdom, and insight.
Absolutely.
These are always great conversations.
Same. This was a great talk, man. Always good.
All right, man. Until next time. Thanks.
All right. See ya.